Hey all, hope all is well. This is the fourth video in the Road to Grandmaster series. And in this video, I'm going to be covering my round 4 game from the Bay Area International in early January. If you've watched the first few videos in this series, I've gotten off to a pretty rocky start. I started off with 2 draws playing down, and then in the third round game, I even lost a position I certainly should have won. So 1 out of 3 is just a really awful start in an open tournament, and when you're always going to get paired against someone that has the same amount of points as you. So I was probably the highest rated person with 1 point out of 3. And so I'm going to continue to play down. And when you play down, you're playing people, what that means is you're playing people lower rated than you, and you're supposed to beat them. So I'm still in the doghouse and trying to get out of the doghouse. And this was another opportunity to do so. Before the game, I'll just say I'd actually just gotten back from the ER, the emergency room. You heard that correctly, because I was dealing with terrible, terrible stomach pain. And I got a decent diagnosis, and was prescribed some meds and stuff like that. And it was a whole ordeal. And actually, I'm still dealing with some of it even today. But just to sort of put it out there that I definitely was not at my 100% or close to it even. But I decided to keep playing the tournament and just sort of battle through. So, anyways, without further ado, my opponent played d4. I went e6, knight f3, knight f6, bishop f4, d5. And so bishop f4 kind of signals that there's a London system. The idea with the London system is that the bishop gets outside of the pawn chain, and then just tries to exert pressure on this diagonal. And really, it's a pretty interesting opening. If you saw my round three game, you'll notice that I actually used it with white, so I have quite a bit of familiarity here. E3, bishop d6, bishop g3, essentially just challenging that bishop on the diagonal so it doesn't exert too much influence. Bishop g3, and then castles, knight bd2, and b6. The idea with this move was to sort of, I want to play c5, but I didn't want to recapture on c5 with the bishop. I want to recapture with a pawn. So that was the whole idea with that. Let me get rid of these arrows. So, no, bishop b5 wasn't played. So b6, c3, c5, and then bishop d3 is played. And again, you see I have this nice pawn chain, but black has really good control over the e5 square. So pretty much what's going to come down to is how well I'm able to control the e5 square and sort of offset white's counterplay in the center. Because many times white will want to put a knight on e5, like this, or put a bishop on e5 and just sort of use e5 as like cement for further initiative on the king side. So anyways, I played bishop a6. This was my idea with this b6, c5. Let's go bishop a6, and to trade those bishops, because when those light square bishops are gone, white has a little less ammo to attack on the king side, and I was already anticipating pressure on my king on the king side. But the downside to this is that my knight on a6 is really poorly misplaced. So with queen e2, sort of just gets a valuable tempo on my knight, and my knight has to move away. I went knight b8 back. An argument could also be made for knight c7, but I thought that knight b8, I prefer my knights are connected on d7 and f6. The one benefit of the knight going to c7 instead would be that my rooks would be closer to being connected. And if you've watched any videos on my channel before, I have said that usually the side that connects their rooks first has very promising game, because it really usually means they're slightly ahead in development. So you actually find a lot of games where the side that connects their rooks first is the side that wins. Anyways, I went knight b8. Knight e5 was played, and I thought knight e5 was a little bit premature, because I thought I could just sort of gang up on this knight, and I started with queen c7. The point is that if white can't really reinforce the e5 square enough, then white will need to play f4 to justify that. So, for instance, if I get another knight on d7, then I have 3 attackers on the e5 square, right? I have this one, I'd have this one, I have a knight on d7. And then there's only two defenders of that knight on e5, this one and this one. So if I manage to get another attacker, then this knight on e5 would be unstable. And if the knight on e5 is unstable, white might consider having to make a weakening move like f4, which would really not be desirable there because you'd weaken a lot of squares. So that was the idea. So castles, and I went knight fd7. I thought this was clever going knight fd7 because it means that if white does go f4, I just have this move f6 to kick the knight away. So then after a position like knight takes d7, white created some weaknesses, light squared weaknesses on the king side with his f4 move. No, not like that, sorry. Like this, these light square weaknesses, perhaps. But at the same time, my rooks are connected and I have a good position. So that's sort of what I was thinking about. But the thing with f4 is that, maybe it's not something I should have been trying to prevent because, frankly, by going knight fd7, what I did is I relinquished control of the e4 square. And I've said this before that when you move a piece, any piece, you move it away from squares that's previously defending. And when I move my knight away, I moved away from e4, and that allows white to get some better control of that square. Unsurprisingly, after knight fd7, knight df3 was played, but another option could have been to even take on d7. But anyway, knight df3 was played. I played knight c6, again trying to sort of add more pressure on e5 so that white has to capture. White has to resolve the tension. But the unfortunate thing was after these exchanges, because I'd sufficiently weakened the e4 square, now white gets to play e4. And it's a very, very important detail because with e4, the position becomes very, very simplified if I allow it to be. Now, note the move I'd want to play would be c takes d4. But the thing that bothers me about c takes d4 is knight takes, and well, there's knight b5 ideas. They're just very, and this knight is pretty secure on d4 because I don't really want to play e5 and push it away. Because if I play e5, the knight can come back to f3, and then my pieces are a little bit strange, and the rook on d1 could come there, and my e5 pawn might be a little bit of a target, and I think white has a little bit of an edge, even though it should be equal. So I didn't really want the knight to come to d4. The other move I'd love to play is knight f6, but unfortunately that just runs into a fork with e5. I really want to keep tension in this position, but it's kind of hard to do that. So anyways, I played d takes e4, and after queen takes e4, I played knight f6, essentially trying to keep a little bit of tension and unbalance in the position. Note that I have a 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the king side, and white has a potential 3 versus 2 on the queen side if these pawns are exchanged. So I was looking to sort of create some type of imbalance, although it's very close to equal. So queen e2 was played. Again, I don't really want to take on d4 because then the knight just takes. Actually, in this position after c takes d4, white can even maybe try rook d1, just pinning and then taking with the rook. And then this knight has good control over the e5 square. So yeah, so I went rook a c8, again, just trying to keep tension. White went a4, and then I went c4. And again, this idea was just to create a little bit of an imbalance. Note that if, I could, again, try to anticipate the a5 push and maybe play a little bit more prophylactically, or maybe even throw a move like h6 in. But I saw with a4 that after c4, white at least can't play b3 right just yet because it's hanging, and the c3 pawn is also under attack. So I thought maybe this is an opportunity to unbalance the position just a little bit. And then again, now if a5, I have this b5 option to reinforce this pawn on c4. So just to create a little imbalance. So c4, queen e5 was played, and I think that was a mistake. I was looking at knight e5 as an option, just attacking the c4 pawn again. And I guess I'd have to go queen d5 to defend it. But I thought that this would be a smarter way to play, to make sure my pieces all are watching out over my c4 pawn. Instead, queen e5, after c4, queen e5, and I decided to continue to keep tension by playing queen d5. I thought this was a clever looking move because now if queen takes d5, I was going to play knight takes e5, and my knight on d5 is really nicely cemented here. So I thought that was a nice way to go, just to try and keep things going. White played rook fe1. I played rook fd8 again, trying to keep tension. And then after queen takes d5, I played knight takes d5. And I thought this was probably, considering, the opening, this was probably the best I could do in the past few moves. I actually think queen takes d5 was a mistake. I thought white could keep the tension in a better way by playing moves like queen g3, entertaining the idea of putting the rook on e5. And by the way, I need to learn how to do arrows. I'm going to figure that out for next video because I'm doing too much non-arrow stuff. And the yellow arrow you see on the screen is manufactured by ChessBase. So anyways, so I thought it was better to keep tension. White released the tension, and now I thought I can maybe squeeze this one because I have pretty good pieces. My knight on d5 is working pretty well. See what happens. So then knight e5 was played, which I was very, very happy to see because now this allows me to play f6 with tempo. I was looking to play f6 anyway to cover the e5 square, but here I don't even have to worry about the e6 pawn, whereas in this position I couldn't play f6 right away because the e6 pawn was hanging. So after knight e5, I got f6, and after knight f3, king f7, and I just gained a tempo in this position, which I thought was pretty important. Anyway, g3 was played. I went a6, just prophylaxis against this a5 move, and also giving white something to think about that maybe I might play b5 in the future anyway. Rook a3 was played. I played rook d7. Again, it's kind of multi-purpose, thinking about playing rook b7, just sort of a waiting move, anticipating maybe white playing b3, because now b3 I might take on b3 and then take on c3 afterward. So I was sort of anticipating an idea like rook b1 and rook c7, just sort of ganging up on c3 before b3 might be an idea. So that was a little prophylaxis. And after rook ea1, I played g5. And I always felt very good about my play here because in the past few moves, I've taken space on both sides of the board. I've taken space on the queen side with the c4 move, and now I'm trying to, take some space on the king side. Normally, a game is won by opening up multiple fronts. So that's what I was trying to do. Knight d2, and now h5. The idea was just, again, to take more space. I did give e5 some consideration. The idea was that, this knight on d2 was a little bit loose, and my rook on the d file might, uncover and hit the d2 knight. I reasoned against it because I was a little bit concerned about weakening my pawn structure here before I was ready. And I thought that if this knight came to e4, it could be a little bit annoying because it's a pretty good blockading square. But e5 was a legitimate move with some decent ideas. So I definitely could have considered that. And I went h5. Knight f1 was played. I guess the idea was to go knight e3, but I thought white was already floundering a little bit here, and I went h4. And you can see, again, I'm sort of, almost in an AlphaZero type of style. AlphaZero is this chess supercomputer that likes to make these rook pawn moves and play on both flanks. I'm really trying to seize space. Note that g takes h4 is really not desirable because after I play g takes h4, I have another open file for my rook on the g file. And my knight might have the f4 square to come to. So I have this rook here, the knight on f4, so everything just looks nice. So g takes f4 wasn't played, king g2 was played instead. And now I went rook h8, sort of just hinting at pawn tension on that side of the board, thinking about maybe h3 check, locking the king in the coffin, also thinking about h takes g3. So both are ideas. Knight e3 was played. I anticipated that attacking my c4 pawn. I kind of have to trade the knights here because the c4 pawn is under fire, and I don't want to open the a file by playing b5, because in that way, after takes, now white's rooks would get really active, and they would make sense. Here, the rooks on the a file don't make sense. So I took on e3, and after f takes e3, I played h takes g3, and after takes there, I went king g6. And this was kind of the crux of my plan. I thought that my rooks can double on the h file, so this one that's on d7 can go to h7, and then I can get some real initiative on the h file. Meanwhile, I thought my king could sort of walk down the yellow brick road of these light squares and infiltrate on the king side through the middle. So I felt really good about my position here, and I figured that I must be close to winning. I really did. But work needs to be done. So rook h1 was played. I thought that was really the only move because you can't allow this rook h7 to come, allow me to double rooks. But now after trading, the king is further away. And I thought, this has to be a winning position. It just has to be. My king is coming through. So I thought king f5, this happened. And then after b3, I kind of was like, this still must be winning, but this must be the only move. Note that if you go king g2, I just go king e4, and if king f2, I have rook h7. And all of a sudden, you really just can't stop me from infiltrating because my rook forces the king backwards, and then these pawns are all super weak. So b3 was played after king f5. B3 was played, and I thought for a while here, and I played. What did I play? I played rook c7. Why did I play rook c7? Well, I thought that it was better to keep tension. I thought it made a lot of sense to not activate the white rook on a3. So I thought that by playing rook c7, I kind of do that. I'm not so sure what the best move was, but I thought that was good enough. But after b takes c4, rook takes c4, king g2, I was at a crossroads because I saw two things happening. One, I would love my rook to sort of win one of these pawns on the queen side, but I also see these weak pawns on the king side. And if my rook was on the h file where it was before, then I could get around to h2. So I thought, maybe that's an idea. The other thought process I had was just continue to walk my king to d3 down this, yellow brick road, as I dubbed it. So I thought I had a few plans that I could maybe try and, get done. And I went for king e4. But in this position, rook b3 is played, and it confused me just a little bit because now I had to think, do I defend the b6 pawn? Do I give it up? I have to worry about the e6 pawn. If the rook gets to b6, my e6 pawn is a little bit loose. And I thought, okay, there are definitely some challenges here because I have to make some decisions. Unfortunately, I went rook c6, and that maybe wasn't the best move. I could have considered playing rook takes a4, and after rook takes b6, there's this move rook a2 check that actually I kind of had overlooked, to be honest, because the point is that the king, I think, has to go back to the first rank. If the king goes to h3, I don't actually need to defend this e6 pawn. I can actually go king f3. Very, very important move. And the point is that if rook takes e6, there's g4 check, king h4, and rook h2 checkmate, because the king is deprived of the g5 square. Additionally, if the only way you can deal with this g4 check threat is by playing g4 yourself, but here I still have f5. And if you take here, well, I can actually take here first. And again, I'm renewing this g4 check threat. Now here it isn't checkmate, but the point is that the king is pushed out significantly that it probably is not going to be good. For example, like rook f6, I can go g4 check, king h4, maybe even rook h2 check, king g3, and g3. And this looks close to losing because if you play like rook takes f5, king takes e3, I think this pawn is going to force itself through. That's just my initial impression. If you make a move like rook e1, rook e5 check, I might have king d2 just stopping the rook from getting to e1. So, I don't know. Still a little bit complicated. King f4, g4, rook g5. Maybe not the end of the story just yet. Who knows? Anyways, that was certainly an opportunity, and I kind of just didn't see this mating idea. Really, it's only a few moves of calculation, but I just was not myself. So I went rook c6 thinking, okay, I could play passively, and my king is so active that I could win the game, but it's not so simple. After rook c6, c4 was played, and this was the move that I kind of had missed. The point was that now, well, I have my king can't just waltz into d3 because that's what I really wanted to do all along was walk in. I thought that king f2, I go king d3, and white wouldn't be able to hold these pawns because I'd just come in with c4 or king c2. So c4 is played, and now again I have this decision to hold up or take on c4, and I probably should take on c4. Yeah, it definitely could have been considered. Again, rook takes c4, rook b6, rook c2 check looks very promising. So I went g4, thinking that, by playing g4, I lock this king in, I don't give it this escape square in h3, and I still had illusions of checkmating. But after g4, white gets to play rook c3, and now the rook is behind the pawn. White's rook is behind the pawn, which is actually really good. And the rook and my king on e4 is kind of stuck. So if I want to make any progress here, I have to push my own pawns. And by pushing one of my pawns, I give white a passed pawn. So I went rook c8 because I decided to be patient. The point is that if you go king f2, which was played, I thought I might have rook h8 and actually come behind here. So after king f2, I actually went f5. The reason I went f5 is because if rook h8, I thought white would just go back, and then I would be in the same position. So that was my rationale playing f5. f5 maybe wasn't the best move. I could have considered playing e5 as well, because if I go e5 here after d5 is forced, I think, and now I might even get to play b5 and undermine the d5 pawn. I went f5, and after king g2, now I went b5. And the position is a little bit complicated now because after takes and c5, which is forced, I do get this outside passed pawn, but now white has a protected passed pawn. And I think that's still actually winning here, but it requires some work. It's actually a really interesting position to just analyze at home with their own board, trying to figure out how to make inroads in this position, because I definitely did not find the best way. In my calculation, I was going for king d5 all along. The idea was that I was holding up the protected passed pawn, and I thought I was threatening to play b4. So the point is that after king f2, I thought I would go b4 here, and then I thought if rook b3, I have king c4, and when the rook moves away, I thought I'd even have b3, and I was going to queen this pawn before the white king could get over. Because I thought if king e2, I thought I'd have king c3, boxing the king out from the all-important d2 square. And if rook c3, king b2. But when I got to this position, I was a little bit worried. I thought that after b4, white could go rook c1. And I wasn't sure whether I could actually win this because my king can't cross the plane. Unfortunately, I was wrong. I could still go b3. And the point is that in this position, if king e2, b4, rook b1, I actually just have this simple move, rook b8. And the point is that if king d3, I have this check, and then king c6, and I can kind of just blockade the pawns. The point is that the white king has to make a decision. If you go to c2, I take on e3, and then I can take on g3. And if you just sit on e2, I have this very important undermining move, which I had missed. How many things have I missed in this game? But I have e5. And this is actually the very key detail, that if you go d takes e5, now I can just take on c5 and walk over here and mop up the pawns. But more importantly, if you just ignore it and go king d2, I could trade on d4, then take on g3, and b2 is still actually immune because I have rook g2 check, and I transpose to winning pawn ending because after king c3, I can actually trade the rooks and walk my king up the board, or walk my pawn up the board because white's king is nowhere close to stopping that pawn. So I actually missed this line when I was calculating, and I was just worried that I could not see any way to make progress from far away. But I think if I had gotten to this position and then started to think, e5 would have came up to me instantly. I mean, it's such an easy move to see, frankly. Another idea, which maybe is possible in this position sometimes, if the king just walks over like this, I might even have f4, strangely enough. Um, Maybe not here, actually, but the point is that if e takes f4, I actually maybe can take here. And if g takes, maybe I could create another passed pawn, although here I'm having doubts because this king could walk back. So anyway, the winning plan was to actually go b4 and b3, but I was a little bit hesitant to do it when I saw it. Unfortunately, I played e5, and I think this pretty much is the end of my winning chances because after rook b3, very important move, king c4, rook b1, I actually played rook b8, which just is a terrible, terrible move. b4 was still would have given me chances and set me on the right track for this line again. But even here, now white has counterplay, right? Like this 3 versus 2 is not super easy to break down, and it still might be a draw here. But actually after rook b8, the move I played in this position, it actually just allows c6, and now my rook is no longer in front of the c pawn, so I can't capture it, and my king can't chase it anymore. So really just bad misjudgment on my part, because now if I go rook c8, white can even go d takes e5, and well, it's not clear anymore. After rook b8, c6 was played. I went e takes d4, takes, and then king takes. But this is just, frankly, a very easy draw because after c7, not only am I losing my b5 pawn, but I'm also losing the f5 pawn. And boy, was I disappointed to get to this position. I played a few more moves. I played rook c2 check, just forcing the king back, just to kind of show who's boss in this position. But, it was really more to just, play a few moves to just process what had just happened. Because sometimes when the position just changes on you and just fizzles out, you're kind of in a state of shock, and you're like, what just happened? And, there's just nothing I can do here. I'm actually, I have nothing to do here. I tried one last thing, rook c4. The point being is that if we actually trade the rooks here, funnily enough, this pawn endgame is really not so clear. And is actually, in this position, no matter who it is to move, it's one of the rare positions, whether it's white to move or black to move, where this is actually a win. Because if white has to move, white has to step out the way, and then black gets one of these squares to walk the pawn up the board. But if I believe that's the case, yeah. And if it's black to move, even here, black is able to get opposition anyway. So it's actually not so clear. So I was very alert on my opponent's part after rook c4 to go rook f8 and not trade the rooks. Point being that I can't cross the plane. I can't make any progress here. My king is totally cut off. So we repeated moves here and agreed to a draw. Wow. Really not the game I wanted. I definitely had some serious winning chances in this game. I managed to take a pretty dry position in the London system and sort of show my strength in the middle game and towards the end game. And then right when I was close to the finish line, I botched it again. So after this game, I was on 1.5 out of 4 and still in the doghouse, yet to win my first game. So tough position to be in, but hey, you got to keep fighting, and that's what I was trying to do. All right, well, thanks for watching. You're going to see what happens in round 5 next time. And yeah, if you like what you saw, please subscribe to the channel and, even consider supporting the journey. You could do so via PayPal. I have a link in the description below. And yeah, I will see you next time. Peace.